My name is Valerie Adams-Bass. I don't know if I said that. I'm the co-chair for this year's conference. I want to give you a brief bio of each of our presenters this morning's panel 5. So we're going to start with Jen Danifo. Jen is the Senior Program Officer at the Pennsylvania Humanities Council, also known as PHC, and she plans and administers a variety of programs, including the award-winning Teen Reading Lounge. She administers grants and works with Commonwealth speakers. In addition to program development work, she is responsible for building partnerships and providing capacity building training to program partners. Jen has worked in the creative nonprofit world for over 8 years. That means she's got the money, folks. First, as a program coordinator with young audience of Eastern Pennsylvania, where she coordinated arts education programs for school districts in and around Philadelphia. She joined the PHC staff in 2006. She has a BFA in writing for film and television from the University of the Arts and MFA in creative writing from Rosemont College. She currently serves on the board of the University City Arts League and arts education organization located in West Philadelphia, that is. Jen lives in University City with her husband and has 2 lazy cats. I was going to say very lazy, but that's my cat. All right. And I want to also introduce you to Erin Hoopes. Erin Hoopes is a branch manager of the Philadelphia City Institute Library, for those of you who are bibliophiles, probably all of us in the room, for the Free Library of Philadelphia. She has worked in public libraries since 2004 and especially loves teen programming and literature. She began her library career as a young adult librarian at the Northside branch of the Jefferson Madison Regional Library in Charlottesville, Virginia. How many people here know about Charlottesville? All right. So welcome back, Erin, to Charlottesville. And for those of you who were here yesterday, we have the wonderful Stormy Kelsey, a young person on our panel. She is a youth media educator with the Temple University Community Collaborative. She is a Philadelphia native and will be graduating from Temple University in 2020 with a degree in media studies and production. She has been involved with the University Community Collaborative since her sophomore year in high school and has helped facilitate conversations around media literacy and social advocacy. So we'll be hearing a bit more about her today, and we had a chance to speak with her and see her in action yesterday at lunchtime. Our other wonderful young person, India Fenner, another Philadelphia native, is also part of the Temple University Community Collaborative, and she's in her sophomore year studying political science and African American studies at Temple University. India has been involved with the nonprofit UCC, for the last 2 years, and she thinks being a part of this organization has shaped her into a strong advocate for youth and people of color. Sharif El-Mekki is the principal and founder of Mastery Charter Shoemaker Campus, also in Philadelphia. After attending an elementary freedom school, a middle school in Iran, and Overbrook High School, he attended IUP, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. After a stint as a social worker or counselor at the Youth Study Center, he became eager to make a more direct community-focused impact. After 8.5 years as a teacher, a classroom teacher that is, he became an administrator at Turner Shaw Middle Schools. El-Mekki is in his 10th anniversary serving as the proud principal of Mastery Charter School Shoemaker Campus, a neighborhood public charter school in West Philadelphia. West Philadelphia keeps coming up, people.
Born and raised, y'all know the rest.
That serves approximately 780 students in grades 7 to 12. As the principal of a turnaround school in the neighborhood he grew up in, El-Mekki has deep connections and roots in the area which he serves. Each year, 100% of his students are accepted into post-secondary pathways, and 80% are accepted into 4-year colleges. His team at Mastery Charter has been recognized for their community partnerships, student achievement by President Obama, Oprah Winfrey, New Leaders, Penn Can, and others. He recently completed fellowships with the U.S. Department of Education and America Achieves as a co-founder of the fellowship, an organization supporting current and aspiring Black male educators in the region. El-Mekki blogs about education on Philly's 7thward.org. Please welcome our panelists for panel 5 this morning. With such a diverse amount of experience and types of experience on this panel, what I've asked each of the panelists to do to open us up today is to tell us how and why they came to this work, and then we'll move on. Yes. So I'd ask each of the panelists to share with you how and why they came to this work.
Want to go first? Or?
Yeah, go.
Okay. Can you guys hear me? Is this on? Okay. How I came to this work. So I think what we talked about when we talked about this question on the phone when we were preparing, I've always loved books and what they can do for young people. I remember being a young person myself and being in the library and reading about people that were from different places and having different experiences. And I think that gave me a better sense of, I was born and raised in Northeast Philadelphia, never left, I've been in Philly my whole life. So I think for me as a young person, understanding how other people lived and what their experience was really important to me. And it was really, it helped me figure out how to relate to other people, which was really important. And then so when I came to the council, they did a lot of book discussion programs, and that's immediately what I gravitated towards. I will say with civic engagement, when I was younger, my dad really was, strong about voting, making sure you're voting and being a part of the political process. But my mom was not a citizen. She was from Germany. So it was in our home, it was really interesting the way we talked about being politically involved. On one hand, my dad was really politically involved. On the other hand, my mom was not, for many reasons. So I think the civic engagement part of the work is something that I came to much later. I'm going to talk a little bit about TRL and how we've started to connect that to actually taking action. I think that's something that is still dawning for me and still building. And I hope, in the role that I have as grant maker, to work with other sites that are interested in connecting their young people through books to action.
Thank you, Jen. Erin?
Hi. I think for me, the civic engagement piece of the work just came out of connections with the teens that I work with. I started in a more traditional library program model, which is librarians think this is a good idea for a program, let's do this. And as I've gotten to know the teens who are coming into the library, that's perhaps not the best and most appropriate approach. Teens have their own ideas, why they come to the library, what they need, what's important for them, and I think just listening to them is sort of how the civic engagement piece grew organically out of the programming that I was doing. Specifically, the civic engagement that we did in Teen Reading Lounge, and kind of the impetus for getting involved in Teen Reading Lounge was, unfortunately, there have been many opportunities in Philly for protests after Black youth have been killed by police, and it was actually the day of one of those protests. I was walking through our teen. We don't have a teen space, so our teens hang out in the children's room, and there was a group of teens sitting at a table talking about how they really wanted to go to the protest. They were all about 7th grade age, and their parents had told them no, they couldn't go. And so, I sat down and talked with them, and it was kind of a changing moment for me in terms of, they wanted to be involved, they wanted to have a voice, but they felt like they couldn't. And so it's been a journey of how can I help them find a voice and create a space for them.
Great. Erin? Thank you.
Sorry. So I originally became a part of the University Community Collaborative because I was eavesdropping on a friend's conversation. I heard them talking about this program that they were going to after school, and I was like, oh, what is that? So they brought me on around the next semester, and the conversations that we had, being introduced to this new language and understanding systems and stuff like that, I became addicted to it in a way, in a good way. And I remember I grew up in a low income community, so a lot of people around me would say, well, there's nothing really in Philly for you. When you just got to get out of Philly, young people aren't doing anything, nobody cares. But for me to be introduced to this organization where young people were showing that they cared, they were coming there twice a week, and they were organizing, and they were talking about the next steps. So that's what got me. So I stayed. Yeah. I'm sorry. So that's how I became a participant. And as far as like becoming a facilitator, I just stuck with the program, and the way that I saw the students around me, like once I was in the program, transforming themselves and learning, it pushed me and made me want to stay and do more. So.
Thank you.
I guess what brought me to this work, I've always been like an open-minded person. I'm always outspoken, so since a child, I've been able to like read people and like speak on what people do to me. So when I realized, like when I first experienced racism, that's when I was so open to like talking about it so much at a young age. And just similar to Stormy, like dealing with low-income houses and families like going through the struggle, that's what really motivated me to move towards why are we going through this struggle. Also with the UCC, we both took interest in it because in Philadelphia there's not many places where you can speak your mind about social injustice, speak your mind about anything, and that's what gave me the opportunity to speak my mind. So yeah.
As far as what brought me to this work, I feel on some levels I didn't have a choice. I was just talking to India about my parents who met and married in the Black Panther Party in Philadelphia. And so our upbringing, our home was very centered on social justice. And they found a freedom school in Philadelphia that was pretty much started by former Panthers and folks from the Black Liberation Army, and they were very focused on a very specific type of education. And so from there, but I didn't think I would work in schools. I thought I was going to be a lawyer, and I thought the legal route was the way that I was going to try to have an impact on social justice. But it was working as Dr. Bass mentioned in the intro, working at Youth Study Center, which if you're not familiar, it's basically a place for kids waiting to be adjudicated. So basically a kiddie jail, and I didn't make it through orientation. It was just too depressing for me, and at that point I tried to look at where can I have a more proactive impact, and it turned out to be the classroom was where I ended. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up in it.
Thank you, El-Mekki. Can you just tell us what a freedom school is before we transition?
Oh, freedom school, first of all, it's the best type of school. But a freedom school is centered on the idea of African students, African American students, Black students being the center and receiving a holistic education. It was, if you know anything about Dr. Edelman and her work in Mississippi, where Black children were not allowed to go to schools, and they said, you know what, no matter, we're going to make sure that they're educated, but they're going to be educated holistically so that they leave school not only unscathed by white supremacy, but they're going to be empowered, and they're going to be highly literate, and they're going to be problem solvers, and they're going to feel a sense of responsibility for their community. So as they're resisting outwards to those forces, inwards they're building their community. And so that's really what grounded my elementary education.
Great, thank you. So we have an idea of how each of our panelists came to this work as individuals, and some of them earlier in their lives, and then later. But what I'd now ask each of the panelists to do, and we'll start with you, Jen, and then we'll move on to you, Erin. I'd love for you to share what you do, what your organization does to take a systemic approach to integrating and approaching civic engagement with young people and social justice with young people. So Jen, could you share with us what the efforts are and what some of your challenges are? What are some of the promising outcomes of the work that you're doing? Why your foundation chose to move in this direction?
Yeah. So we are, we're a humanities council, and that means we're one of 56 state humanities councils out there. So every state has one, in the U.S. territories as well. And so we're a re-grantor. So we give out, like Valerie mentioned, we give out money. And a couple of years ago, we looked at our programming. How many of you are folks familiar with humanities councils and their work? Some of you? Yeah, great. Erin mentioned this a little bit. A lot of times with the humanities councils and with some of the programming out there, it's if you build it, they will come kind of an approach, right? So there's a lot of academics or people from humanities backgrounds or educators that are building programs based on, you know, topics, history, literature, that kind of stuff. And, you know, they're sitting in a room building the program, and then they put it out into the public, and they expect the public to come. And that's worked well, you know, for some of the humanities councils. But I think for us at PHC, several years ago, we said, you know, first of all, you know, we're not really telling everybody's story with this programming. We live in a state where Civil War history is huge, but that's not everybody's history, frankly. And second of all, you know, if you build it, they will come is not going to work for adults, and it's definitely not going to work for youth. So when we started to think about the Teen Reading Lounge model, we'd had a lot of success with book discussion programs in the past. We'd worked very closely with libraries, and they wanted to continue to partner with us. So we kind of rethought how we were going to build, you know, the Teen Reading Lounge program, and really wanted to incorporate a lot of youth voice and choice into it. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But I think, you know, some of the challenges, then the civic engagement portion, I think, came a little later for us. About 3 years ago, we actually redeveloped our grants program, and it's now about resident-driven engagement, civic engagement. So residents kind of deciding what they want for their community and using the humanities to actually make that happen. So we started to incorporate that with Valerie's help into Teen Reading Lounge as well. I think some of the challenges that we, you know, so systemically we're looking at, you know, we're re-granting to organizations that have varying levels of capacity, that are across a big state. They have different perspectives. They're working with different kinds of kids. So being able to build a program that works for all wasn't something that we could do. They have to do that themselves. So in more recent years, we work with them on capacity building. How do you pick a book list with your young people that reflects the young people that you're serving? How do you work with them to come up with programs, whether they're creative or civic engagement or community service programs that really reflect what the young people want to address in their communities. And that was a hard turn for us, because I think a lot of our program providers were just used to building it and then, you know, people coming or not. And then I think, you know, capacity, I think capacity is always an issue, and I think making sure that we're meeting people where they are. Again, I mentioned it's a big state. Being able to understand the different types of communities that we're working with is always a challenge as well. There are a lot of people who don't, I think yesterday we talked about how do you talk to people who don't have the same views as you. There are a lot of people across the state who have different political views. How do we deal with that? How do librarians deal with that? They're hosting the program. So those are some of the bigger challenges, you know. And then also we get our money from federal sources, and you guys know, those of you that are writing grants, there are a lot of restrictions on what you can use that money for and how you can use it. And so part of our role as kind of the intermediate organization is to talk to those funders about what works and what doesn't work, and how they might have to be a little bit more, allow sites to be a little bit more experimental, because one size does not fit all with this work, for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, I work for the Free Library System, which is a pretty big city agency, and I think we're starting as a whole system to embrace the idea of our patrons and our kids informing the work that we do more so than us directing the work. But that is, if you've worked in a big system, that's a really slow process. And so I think one of the benefits of, I'm in a branch of the library, so I have the benefit of being in my own space, and I'm the manager of the space, so I can kind of do a lot, get away with a little more, because I have that geographic separation. But a big challenge is changing the way that, not just that I think about libraries, but also about patrons. You know, it's a lot easier with kids. They have, I think, in some ways higher expectations of us, and so they expect, you know, that we're going to be more flexible, and but it's more challenging with adults, I think, because they think, well, you're here to provide programs, and we're saying, no, we want to hear what you want, and that's a little more challenging with adults. But with my experience has been with young people, they're ready, and they're ready to say, this is what I want, and this is what I need, and here's how you can do it. So a big challenge is Jen mentioned capacity. A big challenge is time and money. for us. You know, I'm in a fortunate branch that has some outside funding that's pretty much guaranteed year to year. That's not the case with almost all of the other free library locations. So money is a huge thing, and time is our other big challenge. You know, we're doing a lot of things with very few staff. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that problem, and so that's a huge challenge. For me, it's about what I prioritize, and if I need to, do my paperwork later, the paperwork happens later. You can see by my pile of filing that has never happened, but my teens have stuff, so.
Great, thank you. In the end, Stormy, when we were talking on the phone, you both spoke about how you became involved, but also how you encourage other young people to get involved, and how you sometimes train or work with adults who want to do this work with young people. Can you share with us your experience doing that type of work?
Here you go.
So, you said training.
Your experience recruiting other young people to become involved in the work and working with other adults who say they want to have the youth voice. How do you work with them to ensure that that voice is prominent?
Okay, so yeah, we have to make sure that we keep our young people involved 100% of the time, and that can be challenging. Like Erin mentioned, that sometimes the process can be slow when they're deciding what they want to do, but we kind of just stick with them and support them in that process. How we recruit students, we go from school to school doing workshops around so we bring presentations, or we do workshops around media literacy, and then they'll come up to us, or we'll the students that we see have are engaged throughout the presentation and are responding. We make sure that we talk to them afterwards. And a lot of these workshops are a lot of the spaces that they're in. So I'm thinking of a particular time where we went to a high school in Philadelphia, and we did a workshop on police brutality. And one of the questions, it was a agree or disagree question. And so the question was, do you agree that the criminal justice system is fair? And a lot of the students disagreed. Almost all of the students went on one side and disagreed that the criminal justice system was fair. And this is a room full of predominantly black and brown young people. And then their teacher was on the other side saying that they agreed. And I think it was one more other student. So if you think about the way that this room looks, so there's predominantly black and brown students on one side, and then there's this white teacher on another side. And he says, They share their experience, they share their stories. They say, I'm walking down the street and they just stop me, and it doesn't they'll stop me for no reason. They'll pat me down, they'll ask me questions. And then we say, so why are you over there? And he says, oh, you guys don't know consequences. You don't know. You guys are just here, and you don't know what the real world is going to be like. He said, he was I had a criminal record, and I managed to make it to be a dean. I think he wasn't a dean at that moment, but he was a former dean. And he was that's what you have to work hard. And in my mind, I'm oh, sounds like white privilege to me. It doesn't sound like they don't know how to work hard. You just got more opportunities than them. But so instead of asking that, we ask them raise your hand if you know someone who's been in the criminal justice system. And they raised their, almost all the students raised their hands. So we said, so it sounds like you do know the consequences. That's what it looks like to us, right? So, and then after that workshop, because it was such a we wanted to handle it correctly, and we didn't want to I guess be confrontational, directly confrontational with the teacher, because we wanted to continue a relationship with the school. So after that presentation, students came up to us and were wow, I've never had an opportunity to have that conversation. Like India said, a lot of schools and a lot of institutions don't allow us to have those conversations. So that's usually something that that helps us connect with students and recruit them and bring them on to our team.
Similar to what everything Stormy said is exactly correct. So
we're going to probably be repeating stuff.
Yes.
Throughout
So even within the program, like after students are like interested, like after we recruit them, we have to gain a relationship with the students. So in order to do that, like you have to be open to what they experience, like what you said yesterday about experiencing trauma for others to grow. Like we have to listen to what they went through, because that's how they're opening up to us, because not many students are going to say like they've been hurt before, they've been like beaten before, but we have students that like open up later. So it's really all about, after recruiting them, about keeping the relationship strong between students, because like Stormy said, they don't have that relationship outside of school or even at their home. So that's why we try to maintain this, like, I guess, brother sister type of relationship. Like they can count on us whenever they want to.
So what are some of the strategies you use to, sounds like you've told us a little bit about how you recruit and how you finesse the adults, which is wonderful. And then you've said that you need to continue to maintain that relationship with the young people you recruit. So what are some of the strategies you use to build and develop that trust with the young people who are coming into your program? With
me, I'm just a open, joking person, so people are like, oh, I can go to her and talk to her and stuff, and I usually, like, at first I'm like, this is what you need to do. Like if a student comes up to me and they have a problem, I explain it to them, but I usually throw in jokes because I'm just a silly person, and that's what keeps them coming back. Like they'll come back because we have it like Tuesdays and Thursdays, so if I talk to them on Tuesday, they're coming back on Thursday, and that's what, like, I love to see, because they basically just showed me that they trust me. So I have to keep that strategy going. Also, even though like I'm a silly person, sometimes I also have to keep like the maturity within me, because like some students like to get out of hand. So you have to like show them like this is a stern program and everything. And yeah, that's really just how I keep it.
So something that I've found to be really effective and efficient is asking them how they're doing. Like it's really just as simple as that. We do check-ins every day before programming, just to see how the students are, and ask them about their day, and we follow up with them throughout the day. If they come in, so we say, how are you feeling from 1 to 5? And if they say, oh, some students will say, I'm feeling like a negative 20. And so we have to check in with them throughout the day and say, okay, how are you feeling now? Do you want to talk about it? Is there anything that we can do? And I feel like that kind of conversations and that kind of interaction with our students is how we maintain that relationship and build that relationship with them. And they can see that we're genuine and we're not just being in their business. So yeah, I think that has been what has made me personally closer to the students, and it's reciprocated too. They'll ask me, even when I come in and I'm a little tense, like they'll be like, okay, are you stressed out today? Do you have midterms? Like, are you good? So yeah, I think just like having conversations with our students has been helpful.
So El-Mekki, I'm going to ask you to follow up on such a wonderful example and tell us, being in a school system, we've heard a lot about some of the challenges of working in schools, particularly in Philadelphia. Can you tell us what that experience is like from your perspective to work in a school system and then your own particular school to do this type of work with the young people as well as your staff?
Yeah, first of all, I can't wait for Stormy and India to come to Shoemaker and talk to our students in a workshop. That's number one. I think I guess a challenge of being in a system is like most other systems. The system itself tries to reinforce itself in different ways, and it manifests itself in at times marginalizing the people it professes to serve. And so you see that in not just school systems, but just in general. In schools in particular, when you look at most of the students, and whether it's Philadelphia or now around the country, most of the students are students of color. The system wasn't originally built for them from the ground up. So when you juxtapose that with the Freedom School, that was built from ground up for Black students. The systems that we currently operate in was not. And it's rare when you find that some radical change happens so that it could be restructured to really be student-centered. And so I would say that's a big part of it. Even if you look at just the example that Stormy gave with the hiring processes, I asked my teachers questions that try to at least get to those type of things, like what do you think it means to lead a classroom that does not have similar background as you? What does that mean? Give me examples. And so we're trying to push and make sure we're trying to hire people, that can look at it critically and understand what are the challenges and what do I need to be humble about, what do I need to be curious about, what do I need to self-develop around building relationships with, which what everyone talked about, like building relationships with youth, authentic. I think too often in systems, people come because they feel like, hey, I mean well. But just because you're not like one of the Charlottesville Tiki Torch terrorists doesn't mean that you identify, understand, and have empathy and want to empower black kids. And so I think too often it is, well, I don't identify with them, so I'm the good person. Well, you can still find other ways to undermine. So if you look at that example, that teachers stand on the other side of the room, how often does that play out in their lessons, the materials that they choose, the conversations that they have, the assignments that are given, just all kind of messages. Like it's not just that one activity. They called it, they pulled it out and put it on the table, but that students experience that mindset of that adult all the time, and that's the danger that we have to resist in the systems that we operate in.
So I want to just follow up. I hear some preaching in the audience. I just want to follow up, and then we'll do a little bit more transitions and open it up to questions for the panels. And they have wonderful PowerPoints if you'd like to see them as well, but I think that they are much more engaging. So can you tell us some of the strategies you use to support your staff and to ensure that they're willing to develop that relationship and hear from your students because you are in a classroom?
Yeah, so I would say one, probably one of the best decision, we applied for a grant so that Dr. Adams actually ran our Freedom School at one of my previous schools. So, there's a real pride point that trying to, and it was a summer program and a, after school program, but something that I experienced as a youth and knowing how empowering it was, not just for me, but for youth around, trying to implement that. I think another way is trying to hire conscious people and understand that even if they don't have it, if they're open to it, I even ask white women, like, hey, what does it mean for your leader to be a black male and really, a Pan-Africanist and a black nationalist? How does that feel to you, and how will that resonate in our school, in our classroom? And I'm trying to make sure that even if you don't have the experience that I did growing up, that you are open and you understand like what the vision is. And then with that is professional development, ongoing. Like I think too often schools are giving single one-shot PDs, and we try to really make it sustained. So one of our recent, we call them PLCs because we break them into small groups so people can feel safe and they're having conversations. One of them last year, our African-American history teacher asked students about their experiences. We're a 7th through 12 school. And so the 9th grader wrote a letter about, to her that we used for our PLC about her experience, his experience in our school. And what he said, but the letter basically said was, I love my school, I love my teachers, but I was racially profiled as a student last year. And so the teacher, just started detailing, like I was walking out of school with my hoodie on, and a teacher, and she put in comma, my favorite teacher nonetheless, said, hey, you look like a hood rat with that hoodie on. And she's like, I didn't feel comfortable about it. She's like, I didn't know that I was racially profiled. Now I know how Trayvon Martin felt. That was the letter that we used for our professional development. Like, so even though I went through the pains and the leadership team, not just me, to hire people that we believe are down with the cause, they still made a statement like this that was not only racist, but severely undermining to the work that we're trying to do within the school. And it was the kid's favorite teacher. So that ongoing professional development, constantly challenging mindsets is the one. And then just trying to build things from the structure. So we implemented a social justice class, which I'm glad this student took, because she realized, like, you know what? I didn't have the term for what I felt, but now I know that they profiled me racially. And so all the eighth graders take social justice as a class where we want them to feel empowered to shake up systems, to challenge authority, and what better place to challenge authority is within the safe confines of a school.
So I want to give
Hopefully
time.
it's safe.
We're trying.
Yeah.
I want to give time for questions, but before I do, I just want to ask one question. I'll ask of the panelists and ask if you could keep it brief so India or Stormy decide which one of you want to answer. So my question to follow up to each of you is, what strategies or training do you do to address or help people come along and become aware of the work and how they work with young people?
I can start. Training. We don't really have training that does this in my library system. It's something that some of us ask for every time we get an opportunity, and even when there aren't opportunities, we ask for it. For myself, I do this on my own. I mean, it's really important to me that the program is not the space for me to figure stuff out. The program is for the teens, and so I spend time on my own looking at, what are my own biases, what am I expecting, what do I anticipate might happen in this program, how do I prepare myself. I try and do that as much as I can, but it's something that I think would be incredibly valuable to have a system that would help me do that more effectively. I think that's something that I would want. But I think most important for me, I try to always come back to, if I'm unsure, if I've made a mistake, if I've done something wrong, I try to just come back to what was my original goal for this program? What am I trying to accomplish? And it's always, I want the teens to feel empowered and valued. And so I try to just have that inform my decisions and do my own figuring stuff out on my own time.
Great. Jen, what does PHC do to support your branches?
Yeah, what Sharif said was really, I think, important about how even if you're not, there's the do no harm, so you may not intend to be doing harm, but unintentionally maybe, showing your bias or being biased towards something that is not working for youth. So I think what we've tried to do is, young people are working with their libraries. Libraries are the major hosts of Teen Reading Lounge, although we are working with some schools now. But they work with their young people to build book lists. However, the librarians sometimes hold up certain kinds of books, right? So these are the books that we are reading, that we know are out there, that are popular. And so what we've tried to do is we've tried to train around how to build book lists and book choices, particularly for young people of color who are participating in the program, that reflect their lives and who they are and what they look like. So building book lists around social justice issues, building book lists that feature authors of color or artists of color, bringing in special speakers in their own, looking at their community, doing a community network map and seeing who is out there that's doing this work that my young people would really connect with. So we do training around that, working with them about, giving them access to different kind of book lists, different kinds of subject matters that may be of interest to their young people, and presenting that back to their young people for discussion. I also think that too, what Erin mentioned about, your own biases. I think that that's something that we're working on now. How do you come to this work, and what are you expecting, and what kinds of, your cultural perspectives sometimes shape the direction that a program takes. So I think working with libraries to think that through and to be aware of the shifts that are happening demographically, or to be aware of communities that have always been in their community but have not been connecting to these programs for various reasons. So those are some of the things that we do around training, and also, like I said, civic engagement and the social justice work, depending on the library, Some libraries run right at it. Some libraries are like, I don't want to touch that. But being able to talk about that as being part of, the learning process, as being part of young people, thinking critically, being able to engage in their world, help solve problems, that is really a big part of the mix. So, just presenting examples of how libraries can take the first steps to do that, even if it's something like just a small community service project, and then building on that and going forward. Because we've seen that young people will take it and they will run with it if they feel really comfortable and that it's important to them.
Great. Did either of you want to share an example before we open the floor?
Yes, similar to both of what you guys said. We usually teach the students about bias and how it happens in media and news outlets usually are biased towards people of color. So usually, one example we used was the Michael Brown case and Trayvon Martin, how they use certain pictures to identify them, and students really didn't realize how much media really profiled them as a thug or just a terrible person. So once we teach them about what media does, that's how we teach them to read stories on your own and not allow what you see in this one TV show or something like that to allow it to focus, to allow it to I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Allow it to just make it follow your path, I guess. This is what happened. We want you to have your whole story. We don't want them to have half of the story or what story they were given. They have to read. We make sure they read stuff on their own, because at the end of our programs we have to pitch a video, and for the video we have to make sure that all the students get the right information instead of what information they're given. So they look up information on their own, and that's how we keep them engaged. Telling them, as a child, people tell you is that the whole story when you tell them something? And that's what we do with our students. We ask them is that the whole story? And if students think it is, then we go into different websites and read different articles about an incident that happened that they might want to reflect on.
Great. Thank you. So it sounds like you're developing critical media literacy skills,
Yeah.
so helping them to understand how to read, interpret not just the images, but the stories that go along with those images.
Right.
That's my favorite thing. All right, so I want to thank our panelists for sharing some of their experiences, and we want to open it up to you to ask them questions. Any questions from the floor? Do we have a mic or, yeah, here we go.
Sure. Thank you for sharing all this. So I think this format is really interesting, and then but because we sort of started in the middle of the conversation, I don't really have a very clear picture of what some of the programming actually looks like. I mean, we heard about UCC, and I know about it anyway, but it would be interesting to hear from the folks who haven't really been able to talk yet about the program that sort of speaks to this bigger theme of youth acting, so we can get an image of exactly what it is.
Sure, no,
Thanks.
great, Sonia. So do you want to give a little bit more of an overview of what you do at PHC and the program? And I don't know if you want to use your slides or
Yeah,
not, and then so we have some time for El-Mekki. Sure.
I did create, I don't want to go fully into the slides, but it might help give some context, and then Erin might be able to. So the program that I'm talking about is, can you guys hear me? Is called, like I mentioned, Teen Reading Lounge, and it's a non-traditional book club for teens ages 12 to 18. And the idea is that they work with the librarian or a teacher or and a facilitator. Usually some sort of educator also comes in. So there's two adults kind of helping with the program, and they build the program together. They build a book list, and then young people so they read a book together, and usually the way that it's kind of started to morph into is that they ask their young people, is there a community or social issue that's of interest to you? And then based on that, they'll go back and do some research on books and ask young people for book ideas. They pick maybe one or two books. They spend about 6 to 8 weeks discussing those books. And they have a facilitated, so the two big major pieces of the program are they have facilitated discussion of issues. The adults do help facilitate that discussion, but the young people are given roles within that facilitated discussion, and they're the idea is that at some point they actually take over and they help to have those discussions peer to peer. And then based on that, there's some sort of activity, idea, project that comes out of that. So, and then, so the idea is how can we address this issue? If they're talking about, say, racism or education inequity. So how does this show up in your community? How does this reflect in your own life? And then what are some possibilities for actually addressing that? And Erin can actually talk a little bit about how she did that with her young people. And then they do a project. And again, the project's usually, so the whole program's about 6 to 8 weeks. Here's one example that I'll show. So the Greater Alany branch of the Free Library, one of the books that they read was A Long Walk to Water. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Alany, but it's a lower income area in Philadelphia. And so they read a book, Long Walk to Water, which is about the water crisis. And then what they did was they did a 5K walk downtown in Philadelphia. That was kind of the project that they did. So it's like small scale, trying to get their voices heard about the issue and connect to something of importance. And then one of the other programs that's about to launch is at South Philly High School. We're doing a partnership with some high schools and also one of the Boys and Girls Clubs in Northeast Philly. And activism is for everyone, so they're going straight up with the activism theme. Not every library or host site does this. And they've picked 3 books that they want to present to the young people and say, do these books speak to you? These are different stories of activism and how activism has shown up in literature. And then based on that, they're going to create a project. This just launched, so they don't know what their project is going to be yet, but they have a ton of ideas for how they can connect young people to different projects in the community. So I hope that gives you just a little bit of an idea of what the program looks like. Thanks.
I don't know if we can bring up my slides, if that's possible. But I can do it without the slides. So, I run Teen Reading Lounge at my location. We're in our 4th cycle of it this year, and we started. I had the kids tell me, what do you want to read? The first year they said sci-fi fantasy only. So I thought, okay, that's fine. We did that, but our discussions all came back to real life issues, and so after that, we mostly are doing, realistic fiction and nonfiction. And this past year, the civic engagement process was a huge part of the grant. So we went through the process almost separate from what we were reading. I wasn't sure how it would connect until the end. So we started we just had a giant sheet of paper and we said, what do you care about? What are you most concerned about? What are you worried about? And they made a big list. And we'll pull it up if we can, but if you can't, you can imagine. It was huge list, big problems, big concerns for them. Oh, here we go. And let's see. So this was their list that they came up with. The next part of the process was to narrow that down and come to a consensus of what was the most pressing issue to them. I kind of thought, how on earth are we going to do this? They're all different. They all had different things that they cared most about, but it was actually an easier process than I expected. They came up, we had them say, what are the most important things on this list? And of course, if you're looking, the ones in orange were the most important to them, and you maybe are sitting looking at them and thinking, oh, there's a common theme. And so, that's how we did it. We said to them, what is something that brings all of these things that you most care about? What's something that ties them together? And they came up with their theme, which was to diversify the education system. The next session, we sat down with them and we said, what does that mean? What does diversify the education system mean to you? What would a diverse education system look like? And they talked about a lot of different things. They were concerned about unfair school discipline. They were concerned about inequities in schools, which is a huge thing in Philadelphia. They were definitely concerned about the content that they were being taught, the whitewashing of history and literature in particular. And they were most concerned about the fact that they felt like schools weren't teaching them what they needed. The schools were saying, you can maybe do this in your life, maybe, but the schools weren't giving them the dreams and the goals that they wanted. So our next step was to brainstorm with them. What can we do about it? They came up with a huge list of ideas. It devolved into much silliness. I did give them one caveat. I said, let's try and keep it legal. But what are the things that we could do? There was some cloning discussed. One of our students, Timmy, really, really wanted to take over Betsy DeVos's mind and control her actions. So once we got all of the ideas on the table, they ranked them and said, okay, these are the things that we think are most possible and that we could actually do. And then I said, okay, what's a way that you could tie all of these things together? And they came up with the idea of creating a blog. And I have to say my first reaction was, oh, that's a big project, because this is a voluntary program. They come in after school. Just attendance is a challenge for us because our kids are pulled in so many different directions. Transportation is a huge issue. Family responsibilities are a huge issue for a lot of our kids. So I was excited and nervous at the same time, but we went through the process. We added extra sessions to our program. We had to just blog planning sessions. They came up with all of the tasks. They made a list of everything they thought they would need to create a blog. And then I kind of added some questions that I asked them to think about. And then the next step was, what do we do? So they brainstormed. They thought of ideas of articles that they wanted to write, interviews. They came up with the idea to interview their peers and each other, and they wanted to compile that into a whole big video. That did not happen, but it still might. But these are some pictures of their interviews. And then, they made the blog. It exists online. It only has 2 articles on it. But every time we talk about it, they're excited. And so I think this is my current challenge. And our current challenge as a group now is, where do we go from here? They have so much enthusiasm and so many important things to say, but it's a matter of, the time. And I think it was a good lesson for all of us in, what is real world in terms of how much work does it take to get your voice out there sometimes. And I think there's still, we have a whole nother year, so we have the opportunity to keep adding to the blog. So I hope that we'll do that, and I think that they will. But it was an exciting process for them, and I think they really felt valued and empowered through the process.
Just in the respect out of time, I won't pull up the slides because it'll be hard for me to find them right now. But our social justice class, which is one of the ways that we try to address this for all of our 8th graders, and about 130 of them, they start off with the idea of identity and who they are and what does community mean. And so that's the first report period, really diving in. How do you identify, and how does that relate to your experience here in America? And then after that, they really go into developing a system where they can dive into issues and social justice issues. And of course, it's called social justice. So that's our fabulous teacher. So the idea is what do students need to be prepared, and what does holistic education look like? A lot of times when people think holistic education, they think the arts and the music. We do that, but we're looking at art and music as resistance to the arts, and how do you bring that about? But also, how do you do social justice, and knowing that it's the idea of if we know our kids are growing up in a capitalistic society, but we don't teach them about capitalism and the traps of capitalism. The same thing, if we know that they're growing up in an unjust society, how do we not teach them how to navigate as well as dismantle it at the same time? So Mr. Dess is here. Here are some of the goals, that students will be able to speak and think critically about it, that they have a theory of social change. And this is right from what 8th graders are learning. And I know they can do it because we had political science classes as 4th and 5th graders at my Freedom School. So I know 8th graders can do it, right? And then they use a project-based learning approach to tackle issues. So students use, but before they even decide what they want to address, they do research. And we tell them, like, historians are best equipped to address things because some of the same patterns. But if you can recognize them through your research, then you'll know how to address them and who was successful and who struggled. And so they research movements, particularly youth-led movements or heavily youth-involved movements, both in America as well as South Africa. And so they're looking at the Soweto uprisings. They're looking at the Children Crusade in Birmingham. They're looking at their read of Coming to Age in Mississippi. And so they're looking at very specific things. How are youth were involved in civil rights movements? And then after that, so that's RP2. So RP1 is, report period 1 is looking at themselves and community. Report period 2 is doing research. Report period 3, they start choosing, here's a social justice issue that I want to tackle and I want to get involved with. So you saw the one slide with the police there. They said police brutality is an issue in West Philadelphia. And we're like, so what are you going to do about it? And so after they figure out what they want to do, they have to build alliances from the other class, because it's 5 classes of 8th graders. They have to, on their own time, interview 25 community members, and they have to find, build a coalition with other 8th graders. Because we're saying you can't just attack an issue that the community, if you remember report period 1, that the community also doesn't feel resonate. So that's why they interview 25 people, family members, neighbors, other adults, but they have to live in the community. So they can't interview a lot of their teachers. They have to actually interview other folks. Then they build coalitions and then they address it. And we're like, what are you going to do about it? So police brutality, they're like, we've never had a conversation with a police officer. We see their actions. It may have impacted our family, but when we see the officer, it may be in court or it may be in the volatile situation. They're like, we want to tell them exactly how we feel. And so that's when they brought them to there. And then the other side, they were like, the history said, they were like, well, we want to talk to Black Panther Party members because in our research, we saw what they were doing. So Barbara Easley Cox was one of the leaders in Philadelphia. And so, of course, they're all a phone call away, right? Like, Mom, Dad, where are the folks? Bring the crew, But I don't actually do that. I give them the number and they have to do it. But, behind the scene, I'm like, yo, you get a strange number. That's my kid. Call him back. And so then there was like, and sometimes people, you're talking about challenges and systems. I work in a charter school. It's a turnaround school, so we're always driving towards outcomes. I think too often, systems say like, oh, just love the kids, and you can love kids to dumbness. That is a real thing, right? So we're not about that life. And at the same time, that holistic education is very near and dear to my heart. So we do set goals like, hey, we want students to read and write about this as they are historians and social justice activists, not just like the rah-rah is one thing, and we'll bring that, we'll shut the street down, we'll do that, and we need to implement policy, because at the end of the day, that's what we want students to be able to do. I'm very proud one of my former students attends here and wants to get involved in education policy. Had dinner with her last night. She's amazing. Taisha Witherspoon, shout out, And so then again about the research and social justice of their choice, and they formed 20 coalitions and completed these social justice projects. And these are all before they even get into high school. Okay, and then just to hear 8th graders use the same language and vocabulary about white supremacy, white privilege, coalitions, social justice, this is part of their education and part of their, what we believe is their tool belt to enact change. You won't be able to see that, but yeah. So, thank you.
So hopefully that was helpful, and I'm sure Dean Diana Hess would be pleased with that presentation of in-school curriculum. We've heard a lot about out-of-school time programming, so we thought it was certainly important to hear from library structures, system structures of schools that do this work during that traditional classroom time and programming time. Any questions now? Any additional questions, or do you want to hear more from the panelists as they can continue to talk? Additional questions? Matthew, we have a question here, Matthew. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for sharing your work. And just to build off that last theme, actually, I'm curious to know to what degree Philadelphia Public Schools have been receptive to this work and allies in the work, and to the degree to which you see this being integrated into the public school systems in an ongoing, sustainable way. Thank you.
Well, I'll briefly start off. We're trying to influence the district in a couple of ways. I think one, the social justice class organically is spread to 7 schools now. This is our third year. And now there are 7 other schools who are implementing it, and we're hoping that it continues to grow. But, you know, Philadelphia, as again, systems, in 1967, 3,500 African-American students walked out of class to protest the lack of black teachers and the lack of curriculum. And it took many, many, many years for that to actually take place where that's happening. So we recognize that, but we are hoping that social justice coursework in this framework it has standards, it has outcomes, it has all of that, becomes a citywide thing. And then on the other side, we're trying to increase the number of black male educators. You all know about the research of the impact of a single black teacher can have on students, and we believe not just on black students, but also white students. We know racism and biases aren't just reinforced through policies, they're also reinforced at people's dining room tables. And so, but having a black teacher can also, or brown teacher can reinforce, kind of the ideas of humanity. It's hard to, if I'm teaching you calculus, it's pretty hard for you to have white supremacist thoughts at the same time, right? So.
Schools are public schools or are they charter schools?
Unfortunately, right now it's chartered. I mean, that's where folks feel more nimble, more feelings of autonomy and risk-taking. So right now, the other 7 are all charters, and not just within our network, but yeah.
Are there ways that UCC works with schools in the public school system or in the school system in Philadelphia that you're aware of, India or Stormy?
Well, I would say like we were working towards building stronger relationships with our public school systems. Most of our relationships come from the students themselves, but it would be wonderful if we could like work with on an institutional level, like with the administration. But we kind of rely on the students to bring in their friends, and like at some moments we have like 8 students from the same school, and that's just because they're telling each other about it. But yeah, we would love to work towards like building that relationship with our public school systems. And they do it, they, like I said before, like they allow us to come into the school and do certain workshops, like we do consent workshops as well. And we actually presented that at a professional development conference at one of the schools in Philadelphia. So hopefully that will lead into something else, but you know, we're working towards that.
Sure. Are there partnerships with the free library system in the public schools at all, Erin?
There are, but the energy is pretty much exclusively devoted to the Read by Fourth program. So it's focused on early literacy and early education. So, I mean, I can only speak to the students' experiences that I interact with, and they almost all go to public school and almost all don't have an experience that is empowering in terms of learning about their own history, they're seeing their faces and voices reflected. Pretty much they don't have that experience. Even in schools that have good reputations, and they go to a variety of schools. I have a few charter school students, and they unfortunately have had the same experiences, but the free library as a whole is mostly focused on early literacy right now with the school district. So in my opinion, the teenagers are kind of being told to wait, and then they'll be grown up.
Great, thanks. Other questions from the audience?
And can I just add, it's not that other schools that in the public schools did not having social justice courses. Like there's an organization of teachers who are mostly in different schools who have the Philadelphia Black History Coalition, and they're designing Black History course and standards post-1967, because when they did the research, a lot of what is taught to students around activism is really tied to only entertainment about black folks. That's the history that people learned after 1967. Is like, oh, everyone stopped being activists and caring and became entertainers. So they're resisting against that. And then you have people like Ismael Jimenez, who's at a high school, who's just doing amazing things through social justice course. But what we're hoping is that the district and the charters all make a decision like they did about African American history to say, this is a course that we want all of our students, not a kid here or a kid there, but this is what we want Philadelphians to know. So we have this idea of one city, one book that they encourage people to read. We want one city social justice courses, at the same time. So.
Great, thank you.
Say again? Well, I started in the district. I was in the district for 15 years, and I can see myself being back there one day. So I'm about the kids. So either way, but Shoemaker's attractive to me because that's the same neighborhood I grew up in. So that's why the school, that when it opened, it was just this extra heartstring pull. So. Yeah.
Another question back here? Thank you.
Hi, this question is more particular for Sharif. I'm working with a public school right now to do some work, around increasing student voice and all of that good stuff, and I'm working with their staff as well. But the challenge I find is the time that they have to actually do PD or to do any training or to do any conversations, and it sounds like you've been able to do a lot of different things with your staff, and I guess the question is how do you carve the time? How do you make sure that the teachers prioritize? Because even with the school, it feels, like even with me, I can identify 10 different trainings I could do with them, but the teachers even feel challenged that they even have time to plan, as a whole English department or as a whole history department. And so how are you able to do that? And is it because you're a charter school, that's why you're able to do that? And how can more public school do that?
No, I think a part of it is that I'm in a charter school, but the other part is, as I said, 15 years before I became charter, that Freedom School that Dr. Adams was able to do at a school that was in the traditional school, that was in a traditional public school. So some of it is will and decision making. And I'm a little spoiled at charter. Our students get out early every Wednesday for professional development. So we have a time bit in, but that also means we believe in the professional development of adults is extremely important. And it means that we believe that content as well as critical consciousness are scaled, and one can't be heavier than the other. If that teacher is an expert in math but lacks critical consciousness, then they're doing damage to the students overall. And so there has to be this balance. But I do think there can be other ways to plan. English departments plan their curriculum. They plan the books that they read. So, as I said earlier, white supremacy ideology can reinforce through what you have hanging on your walls, the books that you put in front of kids, the type of questions and articles that are being read. And so I would say trying to implement it through there. And then some of it, we try to make it low lift, although we'll have teachers read things. It's usually not outside of the time. We're just hey, read this, but this is what we're gonna talk about. So either way, even if it's 30 minutes and you say hey, once a week I'm treating to lunch, this is what we're talking about. And sometimes it may be just some out of the box thinking where it's not, oh, this is the professional development time from here to here. It's hey, I'm hosting for lunch, come to pizza, here's the question of the week that we're grappling with, and we encourage people to just start. What you want to do is build an ecosystem. That's even more important than structured time, is what is the ecosystem and what are conversations being had in between classes, in the hallways, as well as in the infamous teacher's lounge.
Other questions? We have a question back here.
Hi, thank you all for sharing your experiences. I really appreciate it. My question is also for Sharif, and it's about professional development. I really liked your example of using student narratives to inform the professional development process, and I was wondering in what ways, because as we all probably know, we can reflect and we can reflect, but what about the action that we're doing based on that reflection? So I was just wondering in what ways are the teachers held accountable for bringing that reflection back to the classroom and acting based on that.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the flexibility and the structure that I'm in. So cultural context is part of the instructional standards, because and this is our more recent development over the past couple of years. It wasn't always the case. It was always like, oh, make sure that you build relationships, things like that, which is fine. But then we also felt the need to call out very specifically what is the cultural context and how are you helping kids be whole and be better. And so the instructional standards speaks to that. And so as people are being observed and given feedback about their instruction, that is very specifically called out, and it can be subtle things like what type of questions, what type of answers you allow to happen when it's the black boy answering. Who do you push to build on that or challenge it? And who do you say, okay, great, or not even call on them? So it can be things as subtle as that, or, hey, I noticed the past couple times I've been in your room, all of the the images look like this, or all of the point of view look like this. Where's how are students seeing themselves? So this is the idea of like windows and mirrors, right? White kids always get the mirror of themselves from the walls, from the literature, from the teacher. Black kids always get the window. They see everyone else's perspective, but they never see their own. And so that's really near and dear, and that's what we try to bring to our instructional lens as well.
In our last few minutes, is there any other questions? Jen, I'm hoping that you can share with us, Erin alluded to having grant funding to do TRL and that there's a civic engagement requirement. So as we talk about systemic change, can you tell us what that requirement is for the organizations that you're providing funding for and how you came to that decision?
Yep. So I think the young lady actually just kind of teed me up on that when she mentioned, we can reflect, and we can talk, but what about the action? So I think, the program has been out there, so TRL has been out there for about, I'd say 6-7 years now. And the beginning of it was really, about young people coming together to read books that, were they're choosing and to reflect on the themes, and the projects were really creative projects, where they would invite in maybe a guest speaker. I think about a couple of years ago, we really kind of looked at some of the themes that they were talking, and I think I mentioned this earlier. They were talking about things that were happening, in real life, because that's what literature usually kind of talks about or explores. So how for us it was how do we connect young people to actually taking action, because maybe talking wasn't enough. So we tested out about 2 years ago. We rewrote kind of the program guidelines and said, books are still important, discussion is absolutely still important, critical thinking, communication, all those 21st century learning skills still important, but civic engagement, community projects can also help build those skills, and we want to see young people be given opportunities to actually make a difference in their community, because we know that they're ready and willing to do that. So we charge some of our libraries like Erin to kind of pilot that. So part of so there was, the program 6 to 8 weeks. Libraries usually do more than one cycle, so they'll do maybe 2 8-week cycles or 2 6-week cycles during a programming year. So we asked them to have one civic engagement project connected to something that they were doing throughout the year. And so we piloted that about 2 years ago, and so we're starting to get some data in about the leadership skills and how young people are thinking about that. I think libraries are places where this can happen, but it's not always the first thing that you think about is like doing a civic engagement program at the library. Some of you guys could probably prove me wrong on that, but in our libraries in Pennsylvania, it wasn't always something that really was an immediate connection. So I think part of what we had to do was really, again, show possibilities and connect it directly back to the books. And again, that's all about, what books are we holding up as, being read and ones that are actually beneficial to our young people. So yeah, that's how, so now going forward, the libraries and the schools now that apply for TRL are required to do a civic engagement or community learning project as part of their teen reading lounge. And we're working with them continually on how to do that and how to make that happen with our young people.
Thank you. Any last comments or thoughts from India or Stormy about the work that you do and how you hold people accountable to keeping that voice of young people present? No pressure. If there's no comments, people will
I mean,
grab you when you
basically, we
sit.
just try to keep the students engaged, like I said earlier.
And you're coming to shoot me.
And we're coming to Shoemaker. So, like with the work, with the workshops we do, like we really encourage students to read up on their own and do the research on their own, because that's their story that matters. So yeah, that's really basically it.
Yeah, read up on their own, but also find connections with each other and really form that solidarity and share with each other and work towards making change as a collective, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank our panelists for sharing both their personal stories as well as their capacities as members of organizations and the powerful work that they do. They'll be here with us for the remainder of the day. And thank you all for being an attentive audience. Thank you.